Our thoughts are fundamental to who we are. What we look like and how we act may be what others see, but what's going on in our own head is how we see ourselves. How difficult must it be then to lose that internal identity? How frightening and confusing to no longer have the ability to form words or sentences, or think of 4 things at once, or know clearly who you are and what you want. These are some of the things a person with dementia may experience. To get an insider's perspective, we meet someone living with dementia, Ms Bryden. 2 decades ago, Christine was a senior executive with the Australian government, providing policy and management advice to the Prime Minister's Department on science and technology. Then, in 1995, she was diagnosed with dementia. She was only 46 at the time and the mother of 3 young children, so the diagnosis came as a shock. It was a difficult time for Christine. She had many questions and fears.
Well, fear of dying, not being myself, fear of how quickly it might happen. That was also a big fear because the neurologist had said, about 5 years before I became what he said was totally demented and had to be put in a nursing home, and I'd die 3 years later. Well, I only had a 9-year-old, well, you know, the 9-year-old and 13 and 19, and so there was a lot of fear about that, fear about their futures as well as mine.
Since being diagnosed, Christine's become a vocal advocate for those living with dementia, writing 2 books, visiting numerous care facilities both in Australia and overseas, and presenting talks internationally on how she thinks care can be improved.
I was told I would not be expected to last more than around 5 years before needing full-time residential care, and that I would die a few years later.
Thanks to the love and devotion of her husband Paul, Christine has remained living in her own home. Paul's intention is to always care for his wife. However, there may come a time when this will no longer be possible. So together, Paul and Christine have been looking at aged care facilities to find a place for Christine.
We've started looking a little bit, and so we're starting to get ideas of what we're looking for. And I think when we find it, we'll say, this is the place, or she'll say, this is the place for me. So on that basis, it'd want to be a place where she wanted to go. And that's why I think, and we encourage other people too, to start looking early while the person with dementia has still got a say in it, rather than waiting to the last minute when they've fallen out of bed and you can't get off the floor and you've got to call the ambulance and suddenly they're in a dementia ward. Start looking a bit earlier, you know, facing up to it, and identify the sort of place. If we've actually identified a place where she'd like to go, that's terrific. If not, at least I've got an idea of what to look for.
We're very fortunate to have Christine, who can describe to us what life is like living with dementia. Hearing what it feels like for her will give us an invaluable insight, helping us better understand those currently in our care.
You know, I used to have a really, really good memory. Everybody who worked for me would never challenge me on anything because they'd know I'd remember something from something or other in some obscure science area. So my memory was very, very good, but now it's no good at all. It's very hard. I live in the moment, you know, and Paul reminds me of things. Things are written down. We've got diaries, and I mean, I just didn't have to have any of that before. I just managed just remembering everything and numbers, and never had to have anything written down. For me, it's very different to who I once was. I used to be sort of like in parallel, everything happening at once in my head and thoughts, whereas now it's in series, so I can just one thing at a time on one track. And much more limited in what I can and can do, and just an overwhelming feeling of exhaustion a lot of the time, because it takes a lot of effort to speak or think or do, so it really does sort of wear you out. Having dementia significantly impairs my ability to communicate. I used to talk very fast, and I used to never have to read a talk, so I am very changed. I used to speak very, very fast and with much bigger vocabulary. I've noticed that looking over old talks that I gave, even the first book, the vocabulary was, and the second book, the vocabulary was bigger than I would use now. So that's changing. And then the speed of delivery, talks that I used to give that might have taken half an hour would probably take me 4 to 5 minutes to speak through the words, and I get stuck on complicated words, so I'm simplifying things now.
It's just had a comb run through it, that's all.
I get quite overwhelmed by noise and motion, so shops and children and there's lots of things that I would find overwhelming.
That's us at Rhiannon's high school year 12 graduation.
Certainly memory is a difficulty. Like for example, Paul might say to me, tonight, wasn't it really interesting having an interview, and it's likely that I might have forgotten. Just because I don't have a sort of chronology picture, a picture of time passing or an idea of what's going to happen unless I try and look at the diary for what's happened either. You know, if someone rings and says, oh, how's your week been? I say, hang on, I'll have to go and get the diary so I can look and see what I've been doing. So I'm very reliant on external clues, and Paul, to keep reminding me, he talks through things so that I can remember things. Just try and imagine what it would be like to be here every day with limited ability to speak or understand and exhaustion. How would you feel?
Thanks to the advocacy of people like Christine, the wider community is starting to understand that people with dementia are still thinking beings needing interaction, respect and dignity.
They always used to say that dementia was just, fatal brain pathology and just write us off as a consequence. Whereas if we reframe that and say that dementia is a change in the way in which I experience the world and relate to it, then I think that leaves more room for respect of the human being that remains.
Our job as care workers is to meet the needs of the people we're assisting. But with many tasks to perform and limited resources, we may be unintentionally doing things to suit our own schedule rather than the needs of those we care for. This, of course, can be especially challenging when working with people who have difficulty communicating. Are we providing the best care we can?
There's a sort of distance between the care staff, who seem to be very busy, and the objects to be cared for, which are the people with dementia. And then we talk about dementia care rather than care for people with dementia. I mean, that says it all, I think, that we're caring for the disease, not the person.
Christine is going to share with us her observations from visiting aged care facilities both here and overseas. These observations give us some ideas on how we may be able to improve the quality of life for those living with dementia.
I find it very overwhelming because it's usually very noisy. There's usually clattering and banging going on, but then there's also staff talking amongst themselves loudly, and then there's all these walkers and sticks and tables, and then things hanging from the ceiling or balloons or things that they've made in occupational therapy. And it's just what I've found sometimes as I walk visiting, I walk into a room and I have to stop first to just take it all in and try and work out what I'm seeing, because there's just too much visual information, let alone oral information. And then the floors are sometimes different patterns or colours, so that you don't know whether you're meant to step up or down, and that's all very challenging. And I can't last very long in a dementia section. I get very, very tired because it's so noisy and so cluttered. And so I just want to sit like everybody else and just doze. That's when Paul takes me home. You go through those doors and it's depressing. It's all oppressive. People aren't wandering around cheerily. They're all just parked at these tables. And it looks very hospital-like. And there's been all this scramble to get them out of bed and dressed and parked at the table. And they're all sitting, not speaking, dozing off, or otherwise they're locked into chairs if they could walk, because they're meant to be a risk.
Well, I know you're happy when you're relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm more focused, probably.
More focused, much more able to focus.
Yeah. Because otherwise I'm just overwhelmed and can't deal with any more input, like talking or noise, or just want to shut down. Whereas if I'm rested, I'm more open to being involved, yeah.
A more peaceful environment can help people feel relaxed and more ready to communicate.
Little separate small areas would be much more restful. More space to have an area with comfy seats, little spaces, not great big open space, but cosier nooks, so people can just sit. And they need to be guided there to sit there and not just put round in the main area, but just guided to sit in little areas. And often I've seen the cleaners leave all the chairs in a straight line, so everybody's just sitting in a straight line, and of course they can't see anybody, so trying to create, visual clues to people that they're sitting near someone else. If you've got people organised into smaller groupings, it's a lot easier to have meaningful interactions between the group with people who come in. Being able to walk in a secure courtyard would be very important, and look at flowers and birds and be outside. And it's interesting, I've heard a lot about some places that are trying to do things like that, and it really helps the residents' mood.
The environment we see as our workplace is also someone else's home. Christine tells us what would be important for her to make her feel comfortable and at home.
A few of my own things around, and a comfy chair, a few of my own things and photos of family. It would be good if they were labelled so that staff could know who the various people were, because I won't know the names very easily. And it would be very good to have on the door or somewhere just a plasticized sheet of paper which says, what I, mother of however many, and grandchildren, and husband's name, and what I did at work. Just a quick thing so that staff could then relate to me. Because there's so many changes of staff, and then often in the dementia care area, you don't get the permanent staff, you get the casuals and the agency staff who really don't know who you are. So it would be really helpful to have, a little life story.
Yeah, I'd even add to that, Christine. There are one or two special paintings or Aboriginal pieces which would go in your room, and I would have a little plasticised note as to when you bought it and where you bought it.
Yes, and what it was.
Why
it means so much to me.
So that staff could catch up and say, rather than asking you, where did you get that from, because you can't remember, they would be able to say, you got this from so-and-so at such and such, and then you would remember being given a few clues.
That's what I like, is those prompts, because it's a conversational prompts rather than questions, because then I can enter into that conversation without feeling I've got to remember something that might be blank.
London went to Montana.
With this bear, that's right.
There, yeah, that's right.
And we went to... You have thoughts, but then making them into words in a timely fashion is really hard. So being asked questions is difficult because it's a bit like stage fright. You feel, can't get my thoughts in order. So you have all these sort of thought balloons and they don't really make it to words, proper ones. You need to be with eye contact and touch and just quietness to be able to communicate, need time. So really people need to pause a lot to give you time to communicate. We just can't do it at everybody else's speed, you know, and everybody's so busy and so flustered and, you know, rushing by. It's very hard. You need to be at half speed, really, to communicate.
People with dementia still have feelings and they can still sense the emotions around them. And if you use your eyes as well as your ears to listen to people, you can often work out what their problem is just by, you know, careful observation. So I'd be listening to people, showing them, you know, affection, love, positive attitude towards them. And if they can't completely express verbally, you've got to try and work out and maybe ask a question. Is it this that's worrying you? Is it that that's worrying you?
It's so true, because we don't necessarily follow all the words, but what we do follow is the emotion behind the words. So it's very important to not have the wrong emotion, which will, you know, really upset someone with dementia. Very hard, I know, especially for families who are feeling a sense of loss and grief. But to try and bring to that person with dementia an appropriate emotion that lifts their spirit. So it's not what you say, but how you say it, which is really vital. We are human beings, just like everyone else, but with a fundamental impairment to our communication and understanding. And then if you set that aside and see the human being with the emotion and the spirit, you can communicate at that level. It's like when I visit Japan and I visit my friends who don't speak English, we can still communicate, and it's at that level of emotion and spirit that we communicate. It's by eye, touch, smiles, you know, doing things together.
It's important to give people choice when providing person-centred care. Christine tells us that providing her with too many options can be confusing and stressful.
You can't hold all the thoughts in your head at the same time, because you have to be able to have a picture of everything and all the options and then decide what's best. Whereas I'm just like a stream of consciousness. I hear all the things you're saying. They all sound wonderful, but then I wouldn't know which one to pick because I've forgotten, you know, the first one.
Well, you've forgotten the first option by the time you've considered the second option.
Yeah, that's right. You can't really compare things easily.
Just understand that the person is doing their best. You know, they are not deliberately being evasive or whatever. They are doing their best. If they had a leg or an arm missing, you'd be congratulating them for how well they're doing. But because you can't see the damage inside their head, you know, you probably feel a little bit frustrated. But if you assume that people are doing the best they can, and then you give them time, try to give them clues to help. Don't ask them, what would you like to drink, for example. Say, would you like a tea? Would you like a coffee? And then look for a response. If there's a non-verbal response, something might light up and you can say, oh, tea, and you might get more light up.
I dread the thought of someone wanting to rush me first thing in the morning into a shower, and I tend to have a shower at night, and that's nice and calming. And it's just a very personal, intimate thing, washing and showering and going to the toilet or whatever. And I don't think people realise how invasive and difficult it is for someone who really doesn't quite follow what's going on to be whooshed straight into the shower, and, you know, unless it's done with a great deal of gentleness and care, you know, and talking through the whole thing so that you don't feel that you're just a burden. Some of us quite want to at the weekend stay in pyjamas for a while. It should be to the individual's needs and wants. And so often you see everybody quickly lumped into a tracksuit and sat at the table. And it seems to be for the schedule of the staff, not for the needs of the residents whose home it is. Because it really is meant to be your home. And I'd prefer not to be rushed out of bed and put somewhere. I'd rather be able to just get up slowly and have spaces that feel like lounge rooms and dining rooms and sitting rooms, and definitely would love to sit outdoors and just watch plants and birds and, you know, maybe fish or whatever.
Christine finds that meal times can be difficult and shares her experiences with eating.
It's difficult because you have to be able to recognise the food, you have to know it's food, and then you're meant to be able to operate, you know, lids and spoons, and I think that's really difficult. And it's a noisy time because the staff that bring it come with a rattly trolley and chatter loudly about their weekend and bang down all the plates, and it's just really, you feel exhausted before even having to try and chew. And then chewing and swallowing doesn't happen automatically necessarily. You can be chewing and chewing and chewing, thinking, oh, come on, swallow, when you're going to work. It doesn't actually work always, so it takes you even longer. So soft foods are obviously much easier, but even then you still have to swallow it. And so it's very hard. I find it's very hard, and right, that whole food thing is difficult. I like colour and, and softness. Things that take a long time to chew, it's just take one bite and think, this is just going to be an awful lot of chewing. So things that are colourful and soft, like vegetables, and things that are appealing and easy to eat, like mashed potato and veggies and, colourful. And finger food as well, because knives and forks are instruments that got to try and work, but finger food's good. Looking at a bird feeder to me is ideal because it's restful but interesting, because different birds come. Not that I can remember what the names are of those birds, but they look different, they're lovely. And just looking at plants and smelling herbs, they're lovely. That's a sort of tactile and smelly thing. When I'm just sitting looking at the garden, I am sitting looking at the garden, or looking at the birds. I'm fully there looking at the birds. I'm not clouded with other thoughts. So I am just in the moment. It's important to feel that you've got meaningful activities, not just activity for the sake of it. It should meet needs for self-fulfillment, self-esteem, all those things too. Well, I've seen some of the activities are things like folding paper serviettes, and the fellows in the dementia care ward being quite annoyed. They don't want to fold paper serviettes and cut out little patterns and make doilies or whatever it is. That's just totally inappropriate. And for me too, it would be, I can't see, it doesn't seem to relate to each individual. Every individual in a dementia care ward has got a unique life story, and it would be wonderful if that could be drawn on to give meaningful activities. Again, I think then you've got to have families and volunteers helping. Obviously there's only one or two staff that can help otherwise. And do more meaningful things, like going for a walk outside, looking at birds, looking at herbs, and cooking. I've seen really good daycare or was it residential care in Japan, where the ladies were using really sharp knives and chopping and things, that ladies with dementia, because that's what they've always done and they could do it. Fold washing, you know, all those sorts of things. So there are things that we can still do. In one nursing home they had a mothers group go in, you know, with their toddlers, and you could see the toddlers relating in the now, the present moment, with the people with dementia, and it was wonderful to see. It was only a few toddlers, it wasn't like a whole crowd of them to wear everybody out, but it was wonderful.
It may seem costly to make all these improvements, but it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Well, I don't think it's about money. I actually think that the care of people with dementia, and that is only one thing that they have, the rest of them is fine. You know, they're still people. The care of people who happen to have dementia is all about relationships between the care workers and the people in the facility who live there, whose home it is. And it's just remembering it's their home, that they are people, that they have difficulties, but they need to be related to in a meaningful way. Yes, to an extent it's about money because nobody has enough time, but if every single small moment that something has to be done for someone is seen as an opportunity for a meaningful interaction, it's changing the mindset of the care workers, changing the vision or the leadership of the facility, not changing the people that lead it, but changing their vision. They're there to provide a home for people who have communication problems, who are still very much worthy of respect and human interaction.
I was just thinking, helping someone to get dressed in the morning is not just helping someone get dressed in the morning, it's encouraging somebody to have a good day.
Yeah.
And an opportunity to sort of, you know, give that encouragement and talk about what's going to happen and that sort of thing. And in the meantime, you help them get dressed. Whereas maybe it's looked at as just dressing somebody. But I think what you're saying is there's an opportunity for a meaningful interaction. Give some encouragement and hopefully a bit of joy.
Yes, yes. And not forcing people. Say, for example, with a shower, if someone doesn't want a shower, how vital is it that, you know, showering absolutely every day, could that be more meaningful? Could it be a time for just an interaction? Well, for many people, especially approaching the end of life, we really seek to try and find a sense of meaning in our lives. And for a lot of people, it's their original faith or spirituality. For some, it might not have been a faith, it might have been nature or art, music. And yet those needs often remain totally unmet. I think you need training, or at least an understanding that that's still a whole human being, a whole human spirit who needs to be ministered to.
To the extent that families can be involved, they should be encouraged, I think.
And it would be good if the families were trained, informed about dementia, so that they felt less grief and loss and more able to see the positives. Because if the families feel a lot of grief and loss, that emotion is going to show in all their interactions with us. And that's going to make us feel sad. Whereas what we want is the gift of a joyful visit. The trouble is family and friends and volunteers tend not to go into the dementia ward because it's so awful. But if it could be improved and could be more welcoming, and volunteers could be trained and family could be trained to understand more about dementia, then they would feel more confident to help with things like food, showering, and just sitting with someone and making them feel at home.
It's clear there are many ways we can improve care to provide a better quality of life for those living with dementia. Paul and Christine say it's not about spending more money. It's about connecting, relating to people with patience, compassion and understanding.
As part of being an advocate for people with dementia, I've visited quite a lot of daycare and residential care here and overseas. What impressed me most, I think, was a place in India, just a dirt floor. I think it was daycare, but it was just a dirt floor in a tiny little place at the back of some industrial area. But the people, it was just lovely, the connection between the care workers and the people being cared for. So much respect and so much care and love. And I came away thinking, well, it's actually not about money, it's actually about the relationship between the care worker and the person with dementia.
We've truly been fortunate to have had this opportunity to listen and learn from Ms Bryden, as most people that we encounter with dementia are not able to articulate their views on these important matters. We need to ensure the environments we provide for people are calm, comfortable, quiet, and provide access to outside areas. We need to modify our own behaviour to avoid speaking loudly and rushing people through activities. We need to provide food that is easy to eat and attractive. We should offer activities that are meaningful to the individual because everyone is different. And above all else, it's relationships with people that matter. And as Christine said, it's actually not about money. It's really about the relationship between the care worker and the person with dementia.
It's really hard to sum it all up, isn't it? Apart from to say, would you want to live there? Would you want to move to the residential care facility tomorrow and stay there for the rest of your life? And if not, why not? And what could you do to make it homely for you, feel like home for you? That's the easiest way to try and communicate that. Because we're just all the same, we're all human beings.